Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Bahai.chat. We're so delighted to have you all with us here today. Folks are still coming in. Looks like we've got 60 guests or lines. There might be more. Some people might be sharing a line. Welcome to Bahai.chat. So good to have you here. So I think we're ready to get started. I am very excited to introduce my co-host, Homa Tavangar, who has prepared a bit of a background. There might be folks here that are learning about Baha'i for the first time or don't know much. So Anissa, welcome, and it's with you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We're so delighted to see all these people here and people continually streaming in. Want to welcome you to the chat. So Bahai.chat is a conversation series that's dedicated to our interconnectedness. So every weekend on Saturday at 2:15, we gather together to think about these ideas, sort of how can we use these resources that we have to create an uplifting moment. So each weekly session is rooted in the Baha'i writings and the fundamental teachings of the faith, like the oneness of God, the oneness of religion, the oneness of humanity. And we have speakers here who are really putting these principles to action to guide us in some sort of session or conversation to better understand these ideas. And this is because core to the Baha'i faith is the idea of independent investigation of the truth. So nobody's faith should be conditioned on anything other than their own search for and understanding of truth. And through Bahai.chat, we really hope to explore truth at the deepest level, that of spiritual reality. Baha'is try to approach all things from the lens of justice and equity, whether that's our work or our school or how we engage with our individual communities, with this idea of creating coherence and using these spiritual principles in all that we do. So with that, thank you for joining us again, and I'll pass it back to David to introduce our speaker and go over the agenda for today. Oh, David, you're muted.
There we go. Is that working?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We're delighted to have with us today Homa Tavangar. She's the author of the best-selling Growing Up Global, Raising Children to Be at Home in the World with Random House. She's also co-author of 5 books for educators. Her latest publication is Global Kids, a colorful activity deck exposing children to cultures of the world and global mindsets. Homa advises and trains a wide range of schools and companies on optimizing learning, empathy, diversity, inclusion, innovation, and global competence. When the impact of COVID-19 became apparent in the United States, Homa wrote Reflections on the Coronavirus and the Oneness of Humanity, which has been one of the most shared articles ever on BahaiTeachings.org. So Homa, we're delighted to have you, and it's with you now.
Okay. Thank you so much, David and Anissa. This is really special. I don't think I've ever, I've given many different presentations, but I've never been at least partially introduced or joined in with one of my 3 daughters. And so it's really special to have, to see Anissa here and join you. And I have to say, I'm trying not to be emotional because Anissa's in New York City, I'm in Philadelphia. 2 of my daughters are in New York City. We haven't, obviously been able to be close to each other, and I'm just really proud of a lot of wonderful things that they're both doing, serving their communities. And so this is getting out my Kleenex because I can't really think about it. And I think it's sort of reflective of, a lot of us are saying that this is such a strange time. We are living in such a strange time. It's probably the strangest thing that most of us experience. And every week, it's been almost 6 weeks that I've been quarantined, every week there's some new set of emotions, some new sort of strangeness that is symbolizing what we're experiencing. And just before the 1st of March, when I wrote that article on reflections on the coronavirus and the oneness of humanity, before we had any idea of how disruptive and universal and invasive this pandemic was going to get, there were rumblings that we better get hand sanitizer and toilet paper. And these became sort of these ridiculous symbols of this panic before the pandemic really set in. And that inability of obtaining hand sanitizer, of going all over town looking for a bottle of hand sanitizer, triggered a reflection for me. And I just literally sat at my computer, I pounded out what I felt seemed to be unfolding. And the most powerful idea that I saw, that I keep coming back to, revolves around the principle of the oneness of humanity. And that is a central principle of the Baha'i faith. And so what I was sensing underlying that panic buying was that the spread of the coronavirus proved to me that as much as we might try to shut ourselves off from each other, whether by walls or border patrols or exclusive clubs or coded language or even hand sanitizer, our oneness is inescapable. And it feels like this crisis that we're living in has sort of flipped a switch, that more and more of us are realizing how we are all in this together. Whether we like it or not, we are going to suffer together, apart. And we don't care where the vaccine is developed. We don't care where critical supplies come from. We want them. And the more cooperation, particularly in science and policy, the faster that we are going to get better. And so in the scientific community, cooperation across universities and nations is the norm. And it would be strange to suggest that researchers only work within their border, that they only work within their university, or they only work within their nation. It's sort of a ridiculous idea. And I think that our isolation is showing us that our oneness is sort of the only way out. One other thing that I'm thinking a lot about is a really important idea that goes with the oneness of humanity that comes from the Baha'i writings, that talks about how the principle of the oneness of humanity implies an organic change in the structures of human society. Every society we know, from the justice system to the health system, is crumbling, is crushing under the weight of our disunity, of our separation from each other. And as we come together and help each other, we see how good it feels, like we're cheering on our healthcare workers, we're cheering on our frontline workers. It feels so good to be united. It feels so good to see help. And so as we rethink the structures of human society, we realize that oneness needs to be at the heart of each of those. And in my work, I am thinking all the time about building global citizenship and equity and inclusion, particularly for schools, for children, students, for families. And I do spend some time since this pandemic started with parents and educators, just sort of helping them reflect and recharge and think about how they can really be of service. And I get to spend a lot of time on sort of the beautiful ways that our oneness plays out, like in stories, traditions, art, service, play, lessons that we can bring into classrooms that teach about how connected we are to the rest of the world. And it reflected in things like Global Kids that was recently published. So with children, we see how growing up with a global mindset or a consciousness of the oneness of humanity, it really sort of develops like a muscle. We all have that capacity to see and to realize oneness. And when we give our children that gift of this mindset or this consciousness, they are so much better off. And all the research, there's been a lot of research done in many different fields, from neuroscience to how teaching and learning works to psychology, that points to the connection of this idea of the oneness of humanity to the most important 21st century learning skills. That convergence around creativity, collaboration, thinking more openly, more abundantly, is exactly what children need to thrive in school, in life, in their work, in this economy. And so as much as I love thinking about these beautiful ways that the oneness of humanity plays out, I think there is this sort of flip side of oneness. And that is, that's being shown with the coronavirus, that we are one, even when it comes to the hard, painful, and ugly side of life on this planet, that our oneness is inescapable. It's like a law of nature. It's like gravity. We are one. We cannot escape it. And so this coronavirus cannot be contained within a wall, within a boundary. And I think for many people, that sort of darker side of our oneness is it's part of what's driving that anxiety that we're feeling every day. So I have a couple of quotes. Anissa, if you might show the first slide of the quotes that I have. So this is one of maybe the simplest ideas, sort of Baha'i 101. What are some ideas at the root of the Baha'i faith, some of the teachings? And this one, the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. It has taken on a whole new meaning for me as I think about how do we realize the well-being of our fellow humanity? We are all in this situation together for the first time. It's mind-boggling how we're all in this together. And what is the way out? Literally, what is the way outside to see each other again? It's through the establishment of our unity. It is the only way. And literally, our well-being depends on it. Anissa, can you show the second slide, please? So another quote that is really foundational to the Baha'i writings and the Baha'i faith is this very simple sentence: the earth is but one country and mankind its citizens. And I have never felt that more acutely as I do now, that this pandemic that is keeping us all home, that is toppling economies, that is causing so much anxiety, is not reflecting one national boundary. And we can't solve it by keeping our mindset limited within those boundaries, that the earth truly is one country and we are its citizens, and our well-being depends on us being there for each other. And so in all this discussion, there is a lot and I want to mention also the source of those two. You can find both of those quotes in a book, The Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah. And I was thinking how if I were stuck on a desert island, which sometimes it feels like that right now, and I could only have one book, I think I would choose Gleanings, and it's available as a free download. There's some way that you can Google how to free download Baha'i books, and you can free download the Gleanings, but it is full of wisdom that is deeply inspiring, and it just gives a vision that is so practical and hopeful and filled with love at the same time. So another sort of foundational idea, how do we get to that unity? So Baha'u'llah really outlines very clearly how that happens. So Anissa, can you go to the next slide, please? Baha'u'llah taught that the purpose of, oh, not this one, the justice one. Yes, thanks. The purpose of justice is the appearance of unity among men. So again, super simple quote, one sentence, but this is telling me what is the prerequisite to unity. So the prerequisite to our well-being, we can almost draw a continuum, a visual continuum. Our well-being depends on unity. Our unity depends on justice. That the purpose of justice is the appearance of unity among men. For unity to be achieved, we must realize justice. Elsewhere in the Baha'i writings, Baha'u'llah talks about justice is the best beloved of all things. It is like the most beautiful and beloved thing that he can imagine as this great teacher is the appearance of justice. And I think that what we see, again, that sort of dark side of the pandemic, it's revealed these deep structural inequities and ultimately how every one of us is vulnerable to the presence of injustice. So the person who's handling our food, the person who's giving us our change, these people who have been serving at minimum wage, who can barely get by, their well-being is my well-being. The well-being of someone in a town, maybe you've never heard of Wuhan before January 2020, but now we see their well-being is so closely tied with each of ours, and we cannot get away from that. So I think that is such a powerful takeaway for me. I also think that as much as we're thinking about this big picture, the earth is but one country, we can also reflect what is deeply intimate and personal. And so that is another prerequisite to me for oneness that I interpret from the Baha'i writings is empathy. And I think coronavirus is illuminating that issue. That as we stocked up on supplies, as we panic bought toilet paper, how could we not think about the millions of people that are living under devastating conditions? Especially, I think a lot about those living as refugees who don't even have water to wash their hands with for 20 seconds that we are all, thinking about so much. So how can I live in greater empathy as I am passing these days pretty restless in the comfort of my own home? And Abdul Baha, who is a central figure in the Baha'i faith, he talks about a lot of different ways of practicing empathy. One quote that's really beautiful, he says, "Be thou loving to every afflicted one, a dispeller of sorrows to every grieved one, a consolation to dejected hearts, a blessing to unfortunate souls." And so in my work in education, we think of empathy as actually a critical 21st century learning skill, that is sort of a muscle that helps unlock doors of knowledge. It helps us design solutions to difficult problems, recognize perspectives that we couldn't take before, and that it really is at the foundation of this sort of modern way of learning, is working on the muscle of empathy. And that quote from Abdul Baha helps us amplify what empathy means. And I really think about how empathy is much more than just putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. It's almost like this merging, an emotional merging, where ego melts away and that oneness is realized at a very intimate and profound level. So this is personal. We have to think of oneness as more than just, again, the whole wide world. It's that, and it's a sort of yes and intimate. So there's an idea that Carl Sagan, the scientist, articulated. He said, there are as many atoms in each molecule of your DNA as there are stars in the typical galaxy. And I am astounded by that quote. It tells me there is a universe inside me, that this idea of oneness is so intimate, it's so personal and real. And how do I translate that? So it's what I care about links me to the oneness of humanity. And so that means we also have to work on our hearts. And Baha'u'llah in the 7 Valleys and the 4 Valleys, which is another beautiful mystical work of Baha'u'llah's, he says that love is a light that never dwelleth in a heart possessed by fear. So that right now, I think we are living in the most high anxiety moment of modern history. That is universally, there is a universal anxiety that people are feeling. And one tool that helps me is to think about how I can be conscious that I am going to make every effort I can to choose love over fear and aim for service and empathy over selfishness, like stocking up, buying all that toilet paper out of the store, and panicking. So love is a light that never dwelleth in a heart possessed by fear. Another quote that is, and maybe Anissa, you can show this one, be calm, be strong, be grateful, and become a lamp full of light. So I think when we think about oneness, we think about the macro, and these are some strategies to help us realize oneness at a very micro personal level of what is in our hearts and in our thoughts. So first, love is a light that never dwelleth in a heart possessed by fear. So replace that fear with love in your heart. And one of the ways that I try to do that, this prayer from the Baha'i writings, be calm, be strong, be grateful, and become a lamp full of light, has sort of become a centering meditation for me, that it helps me reinforce that I can be calm, I can be strong, and I can be grateful. And being grateful, we know there's a lot of brain science that is a huge contributor to being happy. And so there's an aspirational element to this quote too. I want to become a lamp full of light. And that lamp full of light sort of helps raise me to something higher than I started off being. And finally, another idea, this is the first prayer that many children are taught, whether you are a Baha'i or you attend a neighborhood interfaith, neighborhood children's class inspired by the Baha'i community, that Baha'i children and others learn. It says, "Oh God, guide me, protect me, illumine the lamp of my heart." And I think about how this can help us at any age right now. And another way to think about this, "Oh God, guide me," is really beseeching whatever the higher power that you may believe in or call God, or the universe, or whatever you call that higher power. Use me, God. And what I think about that, use me, is I want to serve. I want to reach my potential. I want to understand why I am going through what I am going through, why my neighbor is suffering in that way. Use me, God. Use me, comma, God. 3 words, 1 piece of punctuation in the middle. Use me, God, to realize what can I gain to grow from this moment in time. And I think if we come out of this moment unchanged, we've lost an opportunity. So from our institutions, our structures of human society, to our human heart, this is a chance for us to realize how can I be used to serve and to create that world that we are dreaming about? And I think it's important to even imagine, what does oneness look like? How does it play out? I think there, and we see there is so much power when we come together to realize that. So my reflection on the coronavirus and the oneness of humanity is that this is a process that is outward and global, and it is truly intimate and hyper-local. And if we can create that link between the global and the personal intimate, we have a chance that the well-being of mankind, its peace and security, might be realized through that unity. So I think I will. Oh, and I wanted one last thing. I want to give, I know we have some people that I know through, I saw through Twitter, through when I posted on Twitter, some teachers that I work with around the world have joined us. And I want to give a particular shout out. I think there are many unsung heroes that we are seeing in this pandemic process. And among those are the teachers and the parents. And so we're seeing this worldwide situation where there's basically no childcare, and everyone's home and figuring it out. And there's a lot of stress and anxiety and exhaustion. And so I want to honor those teachers and those parents who are really trying to be calm, be strong, be grateful, and become a lamp. And so I hope that that reflection on the oneness of humanity helps us to get through what have been some really hard times.
Wow. Thank you so much, Homa. That was a wonderful talk. And it seems that we gave you 20 minutes. There was a lot packed in that. Get ready for us to invite you back to do a series to get even deeper on this stuff. The paper, Reflections on the Coronavirus and the Oneness of Humanity, is linked to our site. Is that right, Anissa?
What do you mean link to our site?
Well, you'll be able to go to our site and find that paper.
Yeah, on our Facebook page.
On our Facebook page, and Google Homa Tavangar. Her books are available. And why don't you tell us, Anissa, a bit about the question and answer process? Have we figured it out this time?
Yeah. So we're going to do some Q&A now, because I'm sure, all of these reflections bring up a lot in our minds. So the best way that we can do that is through utilizing social media. So if people have a question that they would like to ask Homa, oops, sorry. I got bumped off being a host, so I can't share my screen anymore. So quick interlude. Josefina, can you make me a host again? Well, basically, oh, there we are. So in order to share a question, you can send them in on Instagram and Facebook. So on Instagram, we're at Bahai.chat, and our Facebook page is also Bahai.chat. So send those in as a message, and we will get to as many questions as we can. It would also be great if you can include your name and where you're coming from, so we can get a little sense of sort of the diversity and the spectrum of people who are joining us today. Yeah. So we will take a minute for some questions to come in. But maybe we can start us off. This quote of "Be calm, be strong, be grateful." I was wondering if you could maybe share, Homa, what are moments that have made you grateful, or what are things that have brought up that gratitude in you during this process?
Well, that's sort of one of the things I really strive to have gratitude at top of mind all the time. And we kind of, now that we have a little mother-daughter thing going on here, I can share, like, this is sort of a family joke that you'll say, "Oh, mommy, are you crying of gratitude again?" I am very moved when I pause and practice gratitude. It's very moving to me. You know, I see faces popping up here. I feel grateful. So I just think that creating a practice of having gratitude top of mind is, it's like a sanity builder, not just a happiness builder. And what inspires me is when I see the people who are going through the most practicing the most gratitude, and they end up being the most generous and the most inspiring. So I just think keeping it top of mind is a very powerful practice. And there is the discipline of, you know, one can keep a journal and think of 3 distinct things you're grateful for every day. And I guarantee you will never run out of things to be grateful for, even in the hardest times. And that is, it really is such a powerful example. And we see that in literature, people who have shared their memoirs of going through times of extreme suffering and tests, one of the things that kept them strong and calm and powerful and was being grateful. Have any questions coming in yet?
We did have one question about if it's going to be recorded, and the answer is yes. So we're recording it. We're also streaming onto Facebook right now, so you can share the full stream, and then we'll be sharing video clips of some sort of standout favorite moments. We also have a question in about if you've heard about what some teachers are doing with students to help their students right now.
Yes, yes. There is some incredible literature and incredible sharing, and Twitter gets a really bad rap because of people who sort of abuse it for their being mean or certain, you know, other uses. But one of the incredible ways that Twitter is being used is by educators, and they share great practices. They share even what's happening in kindergarten on a kinder chat on Twitter. But there are, I think, one of the big lessons that educators are learning right now is that you can't just transfer school as we knew it, which is highly flawed. And I am actually working on a book project about sort of rethinking the big questions that we ask in schools, particularly after this crisis. But you can't just take that flawed, broken system of school and expect to translate it onto a screen with kids not being together. And so some of the lessons that are being learned is how deeply important relationship is. And so school is definitely reduced to being about worksheets and assignments. We've really kind of lost the point. And so learning and innovation thrive in psychological safety. And so the teachers who are creating relationship, safety, maybe visiting their students at the end of their driveway, giving them a phone call, talking to the family, involving the family in the process of education. Those are some of the really powerful things that we are finding. So it's really interesting because there's a lot of science behind the learning, but I think what's powerful is that it definitely comes back to relationships, to human beings, to the heart. And this idea of the oneness of humanity plays out so powerfully when we see examples of where and how learning thrives.
Can you hear my question? Hello?
Hi.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear my question?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, my question was that question, because I was confused that I would have to go through another method in order to ask a question, but actually a question can simply be asked through this platform directly to you. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we just want to minimize any sort of risk, but if you want to just go ahead and ask your question quickly, that's okay.
That was my question. That's
Oh.
okay.
Great.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. We also just got a question over email, which is another great way to send a question in. Somebody has asked, what indicators do you see at the international level of unity becoming a driving factor in managing the planet differently in the face of health and economic challenges brought on by coronavirus? So at this international level of unity, what do you see as these driving factors to build unity?
Well, I think it's amazing that the plan. It's sort of like we're all in a collective timeout. We've all been grounded, and we've been sort of forced to consider our actions and how we are treating the planet. And I think there are some fascinating, if you read the statements from the UN Secretary General, read some of his talks, and he is talking about how this crisis is going to be, that if we come out of this crisis the same, we've lost an opportunity. And many, many world leaders are thinking along those lines. Not all, because I think we're another idea that is really fascinating from the Baha'i writings is that we are living, a way to interpret history is that we are witnessing two processes: integration and disintegration, destruction and construction. And so there is a set of people who are realizing that the way out is through unity. So climate, health, education, human rights, justice. I mean, there's like every structure of human society, they are rethinking that. And some of the best minds in the world are rethinking that. And we're seeing some results. Like I hear that in New Delhi, India now, you can see, I think it's New Delhi, that you can now see the Himalayas. There is a view that was not possible because the pollution was literally choking people. And so not only can you breathe clean air for the first time in many, many years in a city like New Delhi, but that is showing us a way forward that we never could have imagined before. And so some of the best minds in the world and leaders, like, these statements coming out of the UN Secretary General, like statements coming out of some big, even investment, financial organizations, impact investors, they are coming out with some fascinating, it's like light bulbs are going off, aha moments are going off, where they're seeing the only way out is cooperation. The only way out is sort of subsuming the ego a little bit more, because that is how we solve these problems. In education, one of the things that I always talk about with especially leaders in education is the fact that we're preparing students for jobs that do not yet exist, using technologies that haven't been invented to solve problems we've never heard of. And a lot of people were like, okay, but they never really felt that from such a visceral place as we're feeling right now. And so it's causing us to rethink, what are we teaching our kids? It's causing us to rethink, what do we put at the top of the agenda in a parliament, in a court, in a university? What do we need to learn to get out of this mess? And previously, among the privileged, it was just an intellectual exercise, but now it's become real and personal.
I think Josefina, we have a few more questions just came in. So we have a whole slew of questions about this idea of oneness. So what is it really? How does it act? What does it look like, sound like? Because it sounds like something on a really grand scale. So kind of how do we understand this idea of oneness as individual citizens when the concept feels so grand and broad?
I mean, I think there are so many manifestations of oneness. You know, the initial one that spurred me to write that article, when I couldn't get a hold of hand sanitizer, and I thought about how this chain of spreading of the virus from Wuhan to me in Philly, there's a physical oneness that exists, that virus could not be contained. Even like, and the irony of starting in China, that is the country of the Great Wall, not just a wall, but a Great Wall, that even in the country that is the home to the Great Wall cannot contain this virus. So in a really like basic physical way, we are one. Every science, our 99 point something percent of our DNA is identical. We are one. So my pain is your pain. Their lack of, paid leave, somebody's lack of health care is my health. So there's that level. And, I almost feel like if we had the ability on this chat to go around and have everybody write down, and maybe we could comment on your social media, what are the ways that people see the manifestation of oneness? It's almost like, my unique fingerprint. Every person's answer has the potential to be different. But I think even like, we are hardwired for oneness and empathy. Our DNA is almost identical, even to the fact, like, there's this experiment that when somebody says, I could tell you a story that this morning I saw somebody slam the door on their hand. And if I told this story in a more authentic way, you might cringe, you might feel something. That is a like visceral, immediate reaction of empathy and oneness. Your pain, it's not even real pain. I'm just making it up. But your pain, I can feel that. And so it's almost like we've evolved to realize our oneness. But our institutions and our society have not yet caught up. And that's how we see, how climate change and so much suffering continue on this world because we are not acting like we are one. And so I think that is the challenge for each of us to reflect on: how can we act like we are one? And so right now we're all shut in our homes, hence we're having this Zoom meeting. That is a manifestation of our oneness, that we're staying home. Another thing that I think about a lot is that our staying home and our social distancing is an act of love. It's inconvenient, but we do it because it's the right thing. We do it to protect others. That's an act of love. That is a reflection of oneness.
Homa, I'm wondering if you would also, in this same vein, speak a little bit about the Institute process. I think it's important maybe to note, maybe for folks that are hearing about Baha'i for the first time, that we believe that religion is progressive, that all of the prophets have come as part of a plan, and all have announced the day that we're living in now, which is a time when we would be, in fact, united. And for the last 30 years or so, there's been an extraordinary process where Baha'is, long before the virus, where Baha'is have been joining together with folks of every other faith and of no faith who care about making their communities a better place through this idea of oneness. And it's going on literally in tens of thousands of communities. And I know there have been recent articles about some of these things that have unfolded. Maybe you could share a bit about that.
Sure. So I think what you mean when you use this term, the institute process, it's a process of community building where Baha'is and friends, our neighbors, are having experiences where we might study together, we might pray together, we might teach really important universal virtues and values to our children. We might do service with like middle school aged kids. There are different age appropriate ways to build community. And that's been an interesting process of reflection because these are happening on like a hyper local neighborhood level. We are living out our global citizenship at a hyper local level with our neighbors. And that boundaries of what you believe, what you call yourself, how you worship kind of don't matter. We're just learning from each other. And so I think Baha'is around the world are inviting their friends to join them on a learning process, a journey where we are learning what it means to be a community. And so the difference between a global community and a local, those boundaries sort of wipe away. And we want to learn from each other. And so we're really a learning community, trying to understand what oneness means and what unity means. So I don't know if that gets at your question, but.
Thank you. We had another question come in. Can you please elaborate on the quote, "The purpose of justice is the appearance of unity amongst men"?
Yeah, so this is something I'm in awe of that quote because I think it provides a sort of way forward that we live in a time of, on the one hand, there have been great advances that you could say that humanity is more prosperous than it's ever been. But on the other hand, the injustice, the disparity is laid bare before our eyes. We see it, and we all have the ability to take a video when we see injustice, to write an article about injustice that we see, to analyze the data that's out there. All of that illuminates injustice, and that we cannot go around and pretend like we are united as long as there is injustice. And so what does injustice look like? Injustice looks like racism. It looks like the data on prison populations. It looks like a lot of laws that we have in place that allow for the perpetuation of pain and white supremacy and injustice. And so if we want unity, we need to step back from that word. And, you know, one example, in my generation, we grew up saying, well, I just want to be nice to everybody. I'm colorblind. I don't see race. I was raised to just be nice to everybody. And what the quote from Baha'u'llah teaches us, that the purpose of justice is the appearance of unity among men, is saying that, well, that's not true. Because one other thing, it's hard, sometimes it takes layers stepping back. Another principle of the Baha'i faith is the harmony of science and religion. And so science, neuroscience, there's incredible advances in neuroscience that help me understand these teachings in a more full way. So the science of the brain tells me that, in fact, our brain registers bias within 0.2 of a millisecond. That yes, in fact, we do see race, but then we have the rest of the 0.998 of the second, just in 1 second in time, to override that bias. And so our brains have the power to be trained. We know that we register bias, we see color, but then we know we can override that bias if we have awareness that we are able to do that. So we're not stuck in a place of bias. We don't have to be. And I think that's one of the beauties of what Baha'u'llah teaches us, is to love humanity, to see humanity as the flowers of a garden. And so when you see the diversity of humanity and you start off as a child being raised to love that diversity, that's what part of this process of neighborhood development is to teach kids to overcome their bias and love mankind for its diversity. Then we can start to build, that's on a personal level, but on a societal level as well, we can start to build justice. So I'm not colorblind, but I do know that I can override my bias with deliberate effort. And so I want to realize unity, but I know I have to step back and work for justice. So it's a very complicated, that could be a wonderful hour among a lot of people that think about justice on many different levels, from the personal to societal. But that simple idea can really serve as sort of almost like a measurement for us to think about where is justice fitting in? And are we sort of wiping over pain and true inequity in the name of unity? And if we do that, we won't realize unity. So we need to step back and we realize unity actually takes time. Unity is hard. What we're seeing right now, we're all united in this experiment of quarantine, but it's hard. It's painful. And so I want to realize justice in order to realize unity.
Before you go to the next question, you were talking about racism as one of the really, truly great injustices in this country. And next week, Ruha Benjamin, we'll talk about her at the end of this hour, who is, she's a Princeton scholar and professor, and that is her, and that's what she'll be talking about.
She's fantastic. Yeah.
Come on back. What other questions?
Be there.
Anissa?
Yeah, we have another question that is very related to that thread. Someone is wondering, speaking of justice, how do we help these communities where people don't have access to even like the simplest of resources, and what is the impact of that? This person is thinking specifically about students who don't have access to internet when they're remote learning. What does it mean for our whole society when there are these injustices in our everyday lives?
Yeah. So that's been something I've been thinking a lot about. And it's become, that's another injustice that has come to light as a result of this crisis. And I think one of the ideas, and I think this is something Ruha is going to talk about, is that the pandemic is really a portal. It's a gateway to thinking about a new world. And so the pandemic has shed light on profound pain and injustice. So when kids are going to school, which for many is a babysitting and feeding institution, it's not a learning and education experience as much, then we've sort of smoothed over some of those injustices. I find it's really interesting. So I live just outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the United States. And at first, when schools closed, the Philadelphia School District announced that there would be no online school because a significant proportion of children live in poverty, have no access to internet or devices. And so nobody is going to school. We're not going to do it. And that was devastating and really fascinating and powerful, because in Philadelphia is the headquarters of Comcast. Comcast is one of the largest providers of internet, and it's the owner of NBC, Universal. The major media companies in the world are headquarters in Philadelphia, the city that shut down schools and said nobody's going to school because we don't have internet or devices. And so it's like, there is a solution waiting right there to be merged. And I don't believe that necessarily, Brian Roberts, the CEO of Comcast, he's not a bad person, but it just was like, oh, this wasn't a reality in his world yet. He had not really thought about the implications of that injustice. And so now they are hard at work to provide free internet to every student and devices to every student in Philadelphia. Is that a long-term solution? I don't know. But I think it's an example of how these injustices are coming to light as a result of this pandemic, and that we cannot go back to the old way of doing things. That schools, it's not enough to be a babysitter. It's not enough to just be the place where you get 2 meals a day and the nutritional content is questionable. So it is shining a light on many, many realities that nobody wanted to talk about, and they were literally right under our nose. I don't even know if that was the question, but that's the road I went down.
I'm thinking maybe we have time for one more question. And so I think following this thread of thinking about students, and because you also work a lot with curriculum building and teachers and school communities, we have a question about how can we help children experience oneness during the pandemic? So how can we communicate this idea to kids who have a very different sense of the world and sense of themselves than an adult would?
I mean, in a lot of ways, it's like the perfect opportunity. I could plug Global Kids. You can look up Global Kids is literally something I've written that gives kids activities and ideas for connecting to individual cultures and thinking about service and empathy, and it sort of gamifies experiences with different cultures. But, it is kind of amazing to live in this age of the internet. Can you imagine living in this quarantine and social isolation without the internet? It's just really hard to do that. So, there are so many ways. Oh, I'll tell you one idea that comes out of the Baha'i faith is how we teach kids about what it means to be a global citizen. And I break down that idea of being a global citizen means being a friend to the whole human race. So that's a quote from Abdul Baha. It's not even a full sentence from the Baha'i writings, but to be a friend to the whole human race. So you kind of think about, what does it mean to be a friend? And it's sort of like an onion. You can peel back the layers of the onion and think about, what is friendship? What does friendship look like? So what do I do with a good friend? What are the qualities of a good friend? And peeling back those layers of how you play together and you talk to each other and you ask questions and you got each other's back and you're there for each other. Those help kids think about, who am I in relation to the world? I want to be a friend. I don't want to be just a friend to one person. I want to be a friend to the whole human race. And so the way I'm going to think about my relationship to that wider world is as a friend. And so as a friend, when you care about someone, you help them out of that situation. So that helps you think of ways to be more effective as a helper, or how you're going to communicate with each other. And there, you can think of like so many different apps and websites and platforms for watching a movie made in a different country, learning a few words in a new language, learning a game from, I'm tired of all the things we always play. So what are some games from different cultures that I might try out using, found objects around my house, or, you know, those are like really basic, simple, you know, or like I'm going to make something, but I'm tired of all the things I always make. What could I be inspired by from the beauty of the world, from the cultures, especially indigenous cultures, that I can learn from and gain inspiration? And so there are some amazing things that we're seeing children who are open to the world and to these ideas, which is a natural instinct to be open. Being closed is something that they've learned, but being open is something that's natural. That they are finding those ways. And sometimes it is okay for kids to get bored, because it's through boredom and curiosity that you can help discover what you care about. And it's hard to know what your passions might be, but if you allow for curiosity, it helps you kind of find what those, you know, what is important to you.
Homa, thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation and fielding of questions. And Anissa, you need to quickly get Homa back on the schedule before her schedule fills up as soon as possible. Just a couple quick announcements. We said we would hold to 1 hour, and we're right on 1 hour. But again, next week, Ruha Benjamin, an associate professor of African American Studies at Princeton. She's the author of several publications. You can learn more about that online. She's the recipient of multiple awards and fellowships, including from the American Council of Learned Societies, National Science Foundation, Institute for Advanced Study. I knew her as a little girl, and I'm just, you know, like you, I'm feeling emotional just, you know, thinking about her. And the President's Award for Distinguished Teaching at Princeton. She's amazing. She'll be here. She'll be talking about COVID-19, and she'll be relating to issues with respect to justice, and particularly with regards to issues of racial equality. And she'll be here next week. Visit our website, tell folks about this program, and come back again, please, next week. Anissa, can we open up the, what are we opening up? The mics, I guess, for everyone, just to say goodbye to one another here until next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you so very much. Bye.
Much.
Bye.
Thank
What was that
Bye,
website?
everyone.
Bye, bye.
Thank you so much.
Bahai.chat
Everybody.
is the website.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Homa Jew.
Bye, guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you, David Hoffman. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed that.
It's really interesting. And it's just, you know,
Baha'is are known for long goodbyes.
Hello, Pa.
Thank you. Thank you. It was great.
Marie.
Homa, what was your website?
Bahai.chat. Can you post that, Anissa? So Bahai.
The one that was global something.
Oh,
You can look up growingupglobal.net or just Google my name.
Yeah, and all the stuff comes out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
see you all next week.
I love that people don't want to leave. Nobody wants to leave.
That is true.
A long goodbye among friends.
a long goodbye. That's a long goodbye, amongst friends. Bye.
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 Oh, look, that's all these
Thank you so much, Homa, really. It was great.
Thank you.
Awesome. We need
I
to
really
get
appreciate your creating this
recording up quickly.
platform.
Great stuff.
I think a lot of people need it.
Yeah, just like looking at the faces.
Your daughter is
Is this
great.
our
She's
Zuleika?
doing a great job. See you all.
Oh, that's
Okay,
beautiful.
bye-bye.
David.
Bye.
Bye, Homa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Where's the
Bye.